What if Mary Bennet's greatest problem was never a lack of talent, but a lack of permission? Not permission from society. Not permission from her family. Permission to believe that she mattered. Most readers encounter Mary Bennet and see an awkward intellectual. A young woman reaching for books, moral lessons, and displays of knowledge. The easy conclusion is that she simply wanted to be smarter, wiser, or more accomplished. But what if that explanation is too shallow? What if the books were never the point? Because there is a strange contradiction at the center of Mary Bennet. People who genuinely love knowledge usually pursue it whether anyone is watching or not. They disappear into ideas. They lose themselves in discovery. The reward is the understanding itself. But Mary often feels different. Her relationship with knowledge seems tied to visibility, to recognition, to being noticed. And that raises a question that is far more unsettling than anything happening on the surface of the story. What if Mary wasn't searching for wisdom? What if she was searching for evidence? Evidence that she deserved attention. Evidence that she had value. Evidence that she had a place in the room. Imagine a piano standing in a crowded house. The music fills the air, but nobody is really listening. The notes continue anyway, reaching for an audience that never fully arrives. That image feels strangely connected to Mary Bennet, not as a plot point, but as a symbol. A person can be surrounded by others and still feel invisible. And when that happens, something important begins to shift. Knowledge stops being a path toward freedom. It becomes a strategy for survival. The more invisible someone feels, the more they may search for something that can justify their existence. Achievement. Credentials. Accomplishments. Intelligence. Anything that can answer a terrifying internal question. Why should anyone notice me? This is where Mary becomes much bigger than a single literary character. Because her struggle doesn't belong only to the world of Jane Austen. It appears in classrooms. It appears in careers. It appears on social media. It appears whenever a person quietly believes they must earn the right to be seen. And that belief creates a trap. The trap is that no amount of achievement can permanently solve a problem that was never about achievement in the first place. A stack of books grows taller. The loneliness remains. Another accomplishment arrives. The doubt returns. Another attempt to impress. Another hope that this time someone will finally understand your worth. But what if the person who constantly tries to prove their value is also the person who secretly doubts it the most? That possibility changes everything. Because if Mary Bennet represents anything, it may not be intellectual ambition. It may be something far more universal and far more painful, the fear that being yourself is not enough. And once we begin looking at her through that lens, an even deeper mystery emerges. Was Mary really seeking knowledge? Or was knowledge simply the mask worn by a much older hunger, the hunger to feel that her existence required no justification at all? But if Mary was searching for proof of her worth, another question immediately follows. Where did that need come from? Because people are rarely born believing they must earn the right to exist. That belief usually develops when attention feels scarce, comparison becomes unavoidable, and identity starts turning into a competition. This is where Mary becomes fascinating, not because of what she knows, but because of the role she plays. She exists in a world where value is constantly measured. Not only by wealth or status, but by visibility. By who gets noticed. Who gets admired. Who naturally occupies the center of the room. And some people learn very early that they are not the center. When that realization arrives, there are many possible responses. Some become rebels. Some become entertainers. Some become caretakers. And some become experts. Not because expertise is their deepest passion, but because competence feels safer than vulnerability. That distinction matters. Because there is a hidden contradiction inside the pursuit of excellence. We tend to assume that achievement creates confidence. But sometimes achievement is produced by the absence of confidence. The person constantly trying to prove themselves may not be driven by certainty. They may be driven by doubt. In that sense, the stack of books becomes more than a stack of books. It becomes a shield, a certificate, a passport, a silent argument presented to the world. Look, I matter. And yet there is something tragic about using accomplishment in this way. Because the moment your worth depends on performance, rest becomes dangerous. Failure becomes terrifying. And being ordinary becomes almost unbearable. Notice how different that is from genuine self-acceptance. A person who believes they have value can succeed or fail without losing themselves. A person who depends on validation cannot. Every success feels temporary. Every compliment expires. Every achievement demands another achievement. The cycle never ends. That is why validation is so different from confidence. Confidence grows inward. Validation must constantly be supplied from outside. And anything that depends entirely on outside supply eventually creates dependency. This is where the conflict surrounding Mary begins to expand beyond psychology and into symbolism. Think again about that image from earlier. A piano in a crowded room. At first glance, the instrument appears powerful. It fills the entire space with sound. But what happens if nobody is truly listening? The music becomes something else. Not communication. Not expression. A signal. A flare fired into the darkness. A request for acknowledgement. Suddenly the piano is no longer an instrument. It becomes a symbol of a deeper hunger. And that hunger is remarkably modern. Today people collect credentials, followers, awards, job titles, public recognition. Not always because they want those things themselves, but because those things seem capable of answering an invisible question. Am I enough now? Yet the most unsettling part of the story is this. The question itself may be impossible to satisfy. Because external recognition can tell you that you're impressive. It cannot tell you that you're worthy. Those are not the same thing. One is a social judgment. The other is an existential belief. And confusing the two can shape an entire life. Which brings us closer to the mystery. Hiding underneath Mary Bennet's pursuit of knowledge. What if the real conflict was never between intelligence and ignorance? What if it was between performance and identity? What if every attempt to become more impressive was quietly avoiding a much more frightening challenge, the challenge of believing you have value before anyone applauds, approves, or even notices you at all? And if that's true, then what exactly was Mary trying to protect herself from in the first place? So what happens when a person spends years building an identity around being valuable? The answer is more dangerous than it appears. Because eventually, the pursuit of value can begin to replace the pursuit of truth. This is the contradiction hidden beneath the surface. We often assume that insecurity creates weakness. But insecurity can also create discipline, intelligence, ambition, and relentless self-improvement. From the outside, these qualities look admirable. Society rewards them. Families praise them. Institutions depend on them. Yet the same force that drives growth can quietly distort identity. A person who learns because they are curious grows differently from a person who learns because they are afraid. The behavior may look identical. The psychology is not. That distinction brings us closer to the crisis at the center of Mary Bennet's symbolic role. Because if knowledge becomes tied to self-worth, every challenge begins to feel personal. Every criticism feels larger than criticism. Every rejection feels larger than rejection. What is being threatened is no longer an opinion or an accomplishment. It is the entire structure holding the self together. And this creates a paradox. The more someone depends on achievement for identity, the harder it becomes to separate who they are from what they accomplish. At first, this seems harmless. Then it becomes a prison. Imagine carrying a library on your back. At the beginning, each book feels useful. Each lesson feels protective. Each accomplishment feels like another brick reinforcing a foundation. But eventually the library becomes so heavy that it is impossible to put down. Now knowledge is no longer serving the person. The person is serving the knowledge. That image matters because it reveals a deeper consequence. The real danger is not failure. The real danger is dependency. When identity depends on performance, performance can never stop. The next accomplishment becomes necessary. The next recognition becomes necessary. The next proof becomes necessary. And suddenly life becomes an endless audition. This is where the scale begins to expand beyond one literary character. Entire societies are built around this mechanism. Schools reward measurable achievement. Careers reward measurable achievement. Social media rewards measurable achievement. Modern culture often asks a silent question. What can you show me that proves your value? And over time, many people internalize that question until it becomes their own. The external judge moves inside. The audience takes up permanent residence in the mind. Even when nobody is watching, someone still is. That invisible audience becomes the true authority. This is why the conflict surrounding Mary feels surprisingly modern. The issue is not intelligence. The issue is surveillance. Not government surveillance. Psychological surveillance. The feeling of constantly monitoring yourself through imagined eyes. The feeling that every action must justify your existence. And once that process begins, another contradiction emerges. The harder a person works to become worthy, the more impossible worthiness can feel. Because the standard keeps moving. The achievement that seemed sufficient yesterday becomes ordinary tomorrow. The applause fades. The uncertainty returns. A room full of people may admire you, and yet a single unanswered doubt can outweigh all of them. That is the hidden cost. Not exhaustion. Not disappointment. Fragmentation. The gradual separation between who you are and who you believe you must become. Which leads to a possibility that is both uncomfortable and profound. What if the books were never the real burden? What if the burden was the belief hiding underneath them? The belief that value must be earned before it can be possessed. And if that belief is the true source of the struggle, then an even deeper mystery begins to emerge. Who benefits when a person spends their entire life trying to prove their worth instead of questioning why they felt unworthy in the first place? What if the deepest problem was never the pursuit of worth, but the definition of worth itself? That question begins to reveal something hidden beneath everything we have explored so far. The struggle embodied by Mary is not merely psychological. It is philosophical. Because beneath the desire to be recognized lies an assumption so fundamental that most people never examine it. The assumption is that value is something granted, something awarded, something earned through performance, achievement, usefulness, intelligence, beauty, status, or approval. But what if that assumption is wrong? This is where the symbolism surrounding Mary becomes far more powerful than the character herself. She represents a pattern that appears throughout human history. A person stands before an invisible court, presenting evidence. Another accomplishment. Another skill. Another proof of significance. The trial never ends because the verdict never arrives. The judge remains silent. That image changes the entire meaning of the conflict. The real issue is no longer whether someone is talented enough. The real issue is whether human value can ever be established through evidence in the first place. Consider the difference. If worth must be proven, then every achievement becomes a legal document submitted to an endless case. But if worth exists before achievement, the entire system collapses. Suddenly intelligence becomes expression rather than justification. Knowledge becomes exploration rather than defense. Success becomes creation rather than survival. This may be the first major revelation hidden beneath Mary's symbolic role. The books are not the center of the story. The courtroom is. Not a literal courtroom, but a psychological one. A place where countless people spend years arguing for their own legitimacy. A place where every mistake becomes evidence against them and every success becomes temporary evidence in their favor. The tragedy is that no amount of evidence can permanently settle a question that was never objective to begin with. This creates a consequence far larger than personal insecurity. Entire systems can be built upon this logic. Educational systems, professional hierarchies, social structures, digital platforms. They all become powerful because they promise measurement. And measurement creates the illusion of certainty. Numbers feel safer than identity. Rankings feel safer than self-knowledge. Public validation feels safer than private acceptance. Yet the paradox grows stronger the more closely we examine it. The measurable parts of a person are often the least important parts. A resume can measure accomplishments. It cannot measure meaning. An audience can measure popularity. It cannot measure worth. A title can measure status. It cannot measure identity. This is where the symbolic image shifts once again. The stack of books no longer appears as a burden. It becomes a monument. A monument built stone by stone in the hope that reaching a certain height will finally silence uncertainty. But monuments have a hidden weakness. They can grow taller forever without solving the problem that created them. Which leads us toward an even more unsettling possibility. What if the invisible courtroom was never created by society alone? What if the most demanding judge was never outside at all? What if the voice demanding endless proof had already taken root within the self long before any audience arrived to watch? If the harshest judge lives inside the mind, then the deepest question is no longer who is watching. The deepest question becomes, why was the trial accepted in the first place? This is where the central revelation finally emerges. The symbolic role represented by Mary is not the story of a person trying to become valuable. It is the story of a person who unknowingly assumes that value must be earned before it can be possessed. That distinction changes everything. Because the moment value is treated as something conditional, life transforms into a permanent negotiation. Every action becomes a transaction. Every success becomes a payment. Every accomplishment becomes another installment toward a debt that can never fully be paid. The hidden tragedy is not the effort itself. The tragedy is the premise underneath the effort. Imagine a person standing before a locked door for years, searching for the correct key. They collect knowledge, skills, credentials, recognition, achievements. Eventually they carry an entire ring of keys. Yet the door never opens. Not because the wrong key was chosen, but because the door was never locked. That image may be the deepest memory fragment hidden inside this entire exploration. The prison was real. The lock was imagined. The search was sincere. The premise was flawed. Suddenly the symbolic meaning of knowledge changes again. Knowledge is not the problem. Learning is not the problem. Achievement is not the problem. The problem appears when these things are transformed into proof of existence. Because existence cannot be proven. It can only be accepted. This is what many readers miss when they encounter characters trapped in validation. They assume the character wants more recognition. But often recognition is merely the visible surface of a much deeper hunger. The real hunger is legitimacy. The desire to feel justified in taking up space in the world. The desire to believe that one's presence does not require constant explanation. This revelation expands far beyond one literary figure. Entire cultures can become organized around conditional worth. People are taught to ask what they produce, what they achieve, what they contribute, what they earn. These questions are useful. They help societies function. But they quietly create a dangerous illusion. The illusion that usefulness and worth are identical. They are not. A person can be useful without understanding their value. A person can be accomplished while feeling empty. A person can be admired while feeling fundamentally unseen. That is why validation often fails to resolve the problem it promises to solve. Validation addresses visibility. The deeper wound concerns identity. One operates at the level of reputation. The other operates at the level of being. This is why the endless pursuit of proof becomes self-defeating. The more evidence accumulated, the more the mind reinforces the original assumption that evidence was required. The cycle strengthens itself. Success does not break the system. Success often feeds it. And that may be the ultimate contradiction hidden inside the symbolic journey we have been following. The person trying hardest to establish their value may unknowingly be preserving the belief that they never had value to begin with. If that is true, then the revelation is both liberating and unsettling. Because it suggests that the central conflict was never a lack of recognition. It was a misunderstanding about the nature of worth itself. And if generations of people continue building their identities on proof rather than acceptance, what kind of lives, institutions, and civilizations emerge from that misunderstanding over time? Once we understand the hidden misunderstanding at the center of the struggle, the next question becomes unavoidable. What does that misunderstanding leave behind? What is the long-term cost of living as though worth must constantly be earned? The answer is not found in a single moment of disappointment. It appears gradually, accumulating across years like dust settling on forgotten furniture. The first consequence is subtle. A person loses the ability to experience achievement as fulfillment. Accomplishments become checkpoints rather than destinations. The promotion leads to the next promotion. The degree leads to the next credential. The recognition leads to the next performance. Life becomes a staircase with no top floor. The strange irony is that from the outside, such a person often appears successful. Yet internally, something remains unresolved. The invisible courtroom is still active. The trial is still ongoing. The verdict never arrives. This is part of the legacy embodied by the symbolic role we have been examining. Not a legacy of failure, but a legacy of exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion alone, but existential exhaustion. The fatigue that comes from carrying a question that can never be answered through achievement. Imagine once more that towering stack of books. Earlier it represented protection. Later it became a monument. Now it transforms again. It becomes an inheritance. One generation passes it to the next without realizing it. Parents pass it to children. Institutions pass it to students. Cultures pass it to citizens. The message changes shape, but the core remains the same. Prove yourself. Justify yourself. Earn your place. The result is a society filled with capable people who secretly feel illegitimate. This is where the scale expands beyond psychology and enters the realm of civilization. Entire economies benefit from dissatisfaction. Entire industries thrive by convincing people that they are one purchase, one achievement, one transformation away from becoming enough. The promise is always just ahead. The destination is always delayed. And because the destination never arrives, the pursuit continues indefinitely. This is the deeper consequence that many stories hint at but rarely state directly. The hunger for validation is not merely a personal struggle. It is one of the most renewable resources in human society. It powers ambition. It fuels competition. It drives innovation. Yet it also creates anxiety, comparison, and chronic uncertainty. This dual nature is what makes the legacy so complex. The same force that can build remarkable accomplishments can also prevent a person from ever feeling at home within themselves. That paradox is worth remembering. Some prisons are built from failure. Others are built from success. And the second kind is often harder to recognize. A person standing inside a beautiful monument may never realize it is a cage. That image may be the most enduring memory fragment of all. A magnificent structure built stone by stone, admired by everyone who passes by, while the builder remains trapped inside. This is why the symbolic importance of Mary extends far beyond her literary world. She represents a question that remains unresolved in every generation. Not whether people can become accomplished, intelligent, or respected. Humanity has answered that question many times. The deeper question is whether accomplishment can ever substitute for belonging. Whether achievement can ever replace self-acceptance. Whether proof can ever create the thing it was meant to demonstrate. And if entire lives can be shaped by the search for evidence of worth, what happens when someone finally discovers that the evidence was never the thing they needed most? Perhaps that is why this character continues to linger in the imagination long after the details of the story fade. Not because she offers a solution, but because she exposes a question that many people spend their entire lives trying not to ask. Beneath the accomplishments, beneath the roles we perform, beneath the identities we carefully construct, what remains when there is nothing left to prove? That question sits quietly at the center of the entire journey. Not as a problem to be solved, but as a mirror. Throughout this exploration, certain images have followed us. A piano filling a room where nobody truly listens. A tower of books rising higher and higher toward a destination that never arrives. A magnificent monument admired from the outside while the builder remains trapped within. These images endure because they are not really about one person. They are fragments of a universal human experience. The desire to be seen. The fear of being overlooked. The hope that one more achievement, one more success, one more piece of evidence might finally bring peace. Yet the lasting significance of this story may lie somewhere else entirely. It suggests that the deepest human struggles are often not battles against the world. They are battles against invisible assumptions. Assumptions so old and so familiar that they become indistinguishable from reality itself. The assumption that worth must be earned. The assumption that belonging must be justified. The assumption that existence requires proof. These ideas shape lives because they rarely announce themselves. They operate silently beneath ambition, beneath perfectionism, beneath comparison, beneath the endless pursuit of becoming more. And perhaps that is the enduring legacy of the figure we have been examining. She stands not as a symbol of failure or success, but as a symbol of a question left unresolved. A reminder of what happens when identity becomes dependent on a verdict that never arrives. In that sense, the story reaches far beyond its historical setting. The world has changed. The technologies are different. The institutions are different. The measurements are different. Yet the underlying hunger remains remarkably familiar. People still seek recognition. People still seek validation. People still wonder whether they are enough. The forms have evolved, but the question survives. And maybe that is because the question touches something fundamental about being human. Every person eventually encounters a moment when external measures lose their power. A moment when applause fades, accomplishments become memories, and comparison no longer provides direction. At that point, something deeper is waiting. Not another achievement. Not another performance. A confrontation with the self that exists before evaluation and beyond approval. That may be the quiet wisdom hidden beneath everything. Not that achievement is meaningless. Not that knowledge lacks value. Not that recognition should be rejected. But that none of these things can answer the question they were never designed to answer. The piano can fill the room with music. The books can fill shelves stretching for miles. The monument can rise high enough to touch the clouds. Yet none of them can determine the value of the person standing beside them. And perhaps the most unsettling thought is also the most liberating one. If worth was never created by achievement, then it cannot be destroyed by failure. If belonging was never earned, then it cannot truly be revoked. Which leaves us with a final question that extends far beyond any character, any story, or any era. If a human life does not derive its value from what it proves, produces, or achieves, then what exactly has been worthy all along?